Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of How to Leave a Cult. I am your lovely host, Brooke Walker, and if you're new here, this is the first time you may be listening. This is my biography about living in a cult from the age of 8 up until my mid-30s. And I'm telling the story of a specific church that was called the Church of Immortal Consciousness. And it was created by a woman and her husband. She was a medium, so she would trance a spirit. And it dives into all kinds of things between lawsuits with neighbors, arranged marriage. I was in arranged marriage, raising children, emotional abuse, hiring bodyguards. So if you're new here, that's kind of what you're diving into. Now, if you haven't listened to last episode I started talking about my arranged relationship and how that was kind of growing and transpiring and the expectations that were coming in because of that. So that's where we're diving back into today. So me and Colin were in a relationship, living together at this time. And, like I kind of explained last time, like there was not like a dating period. You didn't decide if you were going to be with somebody. You just kind of all of a sudden were with them. And very different than anything outside of this at the time or anything that you would see today. So we lived together. Jessica and Brian were in a relationship as well. We don't live with them anymore, but they're getting married. And so their parents came out. Brian and Colin's parents come and visit. And I knew Colin had had some issues in his childhood and some issues with his mom. I'm not going to divulge all of that today, but I want to kind of explain why some of that's important in a moment. So they came out for the wedding, and I remember his dad took him to the side and bought him a Costco size box of condoms and said, "Don't knock her up." So I don't know if that had to do with me or if that had to do with the cult, because they were coming for a wedding with the other son marrying Jessica. So, but I wanted to be in a relationship with somebody that I was madly in love with. But I was put into this marriage and I was upholding all these ideas I had about what it meant and what I had been taught. And it was my job as a spiritual woman in the church to lead my husband to God. That was kind of the way that the teaching was said. But fun thing, guys. So I happen to have the old stuff, which was the workshops that Trina and Stephen would put on. And it was Immortal Monogamous Relationship Intensive. So when they were traveling around, before they formed a formal entity that was located specifically in Arizona, they used to travel around the US. She would trance, and then they would do these intensive relationship talks. And this is it. This is what everything's based off of. These are the handouts they used to give out. So I'm going to go over that, so you guys kind of understand where my mindset was at the time. So again, this is Immortal Monogamous Relationship Intensives. And this is one of the things that did draw a lot of people in, because there was a lot of open relationships at the time. So there was a lot of people who were drawn in by having integrity with being with one person. It's familiar. I feel like we're going through that phase again in the world. I don't care where you stand on that. It's not really the point of the story. Just saying that's how it was then. So day one, first day, the cookie dough. And I love that this is written down so I can explain it to you guys. Cookie dough. Our existence, all embodiments about getting back to cookie dough, to experience that all is God and we are one with God. Not just like God or with God, but we are God. Simple enough. So they would always explain, to expand on that, is that like vibration, similar to soulmates, we're two people that were pulled out of the cookie dough together. And so you were always looking back to get back with your other half of your cookie dough, right? And then we were all working to get back to the bigger part of it with a spiritual connectedness. The enemies are the mind and ego. Ego, simply stated, the belief that person is separate from any person, thing, or experience in God's universe. So they would preach about the ego all the time. It was said in processes constantly. It was like you were in your ego, but it was thrown out so much it was used to reference everything. Mind, the mechanism by which the ego protects itself from the experience of the cookie dough. So if somebody was in their mind, they may not be in an ego state. Being in the mind could mean that they were overthinking, trying to get too technical and not getting enough in God would be one of those things that they would say that about. Generally, its message is that death and loss are real, that there is just so much of everything, money, air, love, to go around, and that everything someone else gets is that much less for us, and that we should therefore do everything, seduce, dominate, manipulate to get and keep for ourselves. So that was the idea of mind. So in the teaching, it was like death and loss are not real. People just transform their states. So when somebody dies, they're no longer in a body, but their existence still lives on. They even went so far as to say when somebody was born, it was similar, that people on the other side would weep when somebody was born because it was a similar feeling to us when somebody passed away, because they were losing their entity in that state, if that makes sense. The idea that there's just so much of everything, money, air, love, to go around, and everything someone else gets is much less for us, and that we should therefore do everything to get and keep for ourselves. So the idea was that being in the mind was a negative way of trying to pursue things, and that if you could get in God, then God would provide for you, right? I mean, it's not horrible stuff. It's not necessarily the deepest stuff ever either. What is mind and what is out of mind? And these were in processes all the time, and they were thrown at you so maliciously. So suppression is mind. Expression is out of mind. So there were so many times, and I became a quiet kid. Like, I was probably a very outgoing kid until we joined the cult. And then as I began to shut down and feel like I needed to protect myself, I no longer became outgoing because I was so afraid that I would get myself in more trouble. So I was consistently labeled suppressed. And it was a very negative labeling. Like, there was overt and there was covert. Overt, Jessica was overt, which means she would always say everything. And even if she said things that were horrible, it was completely okay because at least she was expressing things. But I was covert and I was suppressed. So because I was covert and suppressed, and I was not in expression, I was in my mind. And that was looked very down upon. And that was an ongoing thing. Like, that started from the day we showed up when I was 8 years old. So The mind is that there is good and bad. Out of mind is balance, which is hysterical because everything was labeled as being good and bad. The mind says that there's mistakes. Out of mind says that there's lessons. Again, it's interesting that they put that in there. I do personally believe that everything can be turned into a gift, but they never treated things like they were lessons. Like, you were never treated like you were overcoming stuff. You were treated like, don't ever fucking do that again. And you better perform. The mind says that there's judgment. Out of mind says there's reflection. Judgment, such a heavy thing that they used and manipulated all the time. The mind said that there's guilt. Out of mind says there's remorse. The mind says that there's pain. Out of mind says there's healing. The mind said there's sensation in sex. Out of mind says there's bliss. So sex had this like constant juggling of control over it. Like, we were told very specifically at different times what was allowed and what was not allowed sexually in our bedrooms, and what we couldn't share, and not having secrets and all that kind of stuff. But it's really interesting. But the funny thing is, Marla would talk about her sex life like she was, hanging off the chandelier type of stuff. But anybody else, that would have been a very negative thing. The mind said there's death. The out of mind would be purpose. Mind says manipulation. Out of mind is control. Mind says anger. Out of mind says consumption. Mind says self-help. Out of mind says family. They obviously weren't pro self-help. Mind says submission. Out of mind says surrender. The mind says complication. Out of mind says intuition. The mind says sympathy. Out of mind says caring. It's funny, I would not label sympathy as being a bad thing at all. The mind says promiscuity. Out of mind says discipline. Some craziness. The mind says loyalty. Out of mind says commitment. I feel like that was used against everybody all the time. The mind says separation. Out of mind would be service. Service was a regular thing that was, I would say, punishment. It was like, if you did something that was considered against anything, then you were expected to serve more. And I remember being a teenager and getting drunk and getting in trouble and having to go clean everybody's house. I think we cleaned, I don't know how many houses we cleaned that day. I remember going from house to house having to clean and do chores for everybody to serve. The mind says saving. Out of mind says giving. So that's another thing that was always happening, is there was this financial, a very common cult thing is that there's a financial thing where the expectation is that God will take care of you. So you should give freely and then God will give to you, which meant that nobody ever saved money. My parents didn't save money. I was never taught to save money. It was against the teaching to have money saved up, and which left everybody just in poverty. It's the dumbest shit that I've ever experienced, especially since I have such a better understanding of finances. And we'll get into some of that in another episode because I think that stuff's important too. Okay, so we're out of those. Now we're into God has provided us with many tools to regain the cookie dough experience: money, birth, children, politics, even war. But the main one is like vibration. Every soul has a like vibration, whether in a body or not. All our embodiments and our time out of the body are about finding and bonding with our like vibration, who is literally the other side of us. The experience of ourselves as God comes from the bonding, becoming in integrity with our like vibration in all chakras. Then we experience like vibration energy. That is the experience of God. When like vibrations experience that energy, it expands to children, extended family, community, and the world. So there was so many times that Duran would start a trance and basically say nobody was in a like vibration energy except for maybe a couple of the teachers. It was like Stephen and Trina are the only ones who are in a like vibration energy, and so nobody was ever giving, you never were doing enough to be doing any of this correctly. Everybody was always falling 100% short on everything. But this is what my frame of reference in being in my relationship with Colin was. Over the course of this IMRI, we will move through the 7 chakras. We will talk about what it means to be in integrity in each chakra, and we will process the out of integrities in each chakra in this group. That was it. So those were the things that were building the foundation of what I was expecting being in this relationship with Colin. It became much more about the duty of what I was supposed to do to be a good spiritual woman. So, but like I shared, Colin had a rough childhood. Him and his brother are quite a few years apart, so they kind of had different childhoods. I know his mom went through some stuff, like bipolar stuff, and did some things when he was a teenager that was very stressful. And I think that it was probably something that I don't know that he knew how to deal with. So I think then for him, he begins acting out. And his brother's gone, left to college or wherever he's gone. And so as a high schooler, he gets into drugs and steals cars and stuff like that. But he's always kind of following his brother around. So he eventually comes to Arizona, but he's still kind of getting into trouble. Then he eventually comes and, comes into the cult, following his brother Brian again. So now me and him are in a relationship, and I have all these spiritual expectations. So I want to there's the part of me that I want to tell this story about this person that I had kids with, which we haven't gotten to that part yet, and talk about having some love and all this stuff. But I don't think that I even had that capacity. I had not created the capacity to really, truly love a person at the time, because that's not what I was about. So one of the things that happens when you've grown up in an enormous amount of trauma is that you create these walls around yourself. And, I reference some of them sometimes as being like heart walls. And they are protection, because you are protecting yourself from the dangers that are around you emotionally. And we can do that in different ways. We can do that with substances as well. We can do that with our bodies and gaining weight. And, so for me, emotionally, it's not like I was an authentic person. I was doing a duty of what I was expected to do. That was who I was. It was not authentic to me. I was not in my heart about anything. I was in my thoughts 100% of the time, and I lived in utter anxiety. And I was trying to perform because I thought that this is the way that you get to God, because that was my expectation. So And I don't know how to create boundaries. I could get another phone call in a day during this time of my life that's, telling me another thing I've done wrong that I didn't even know I did, or that was fabricated because somebody had an impression about something that I couldn't even defend myself for. So I am running as fast as I can, staying in one place to perform. It's like a dancing fucking monkey all the time. You're just trying to like keep it all together and just give everything you have so that you will get the love that you think that you will receive from that, right? And now the other part of the teaching is that the women are the ones that bring the spirituality to the men. So I'm expected to, especially since he's just came there, I'm expected to teach him and guide him and lead him and love him and fuck him and feed him and like all these different things. And at the same time, like, he's not really one for performing a whole lot. And he gives over everything and he starts working full time. And so he's doing all the things he's supposed to be doing. But he doesn't go to trance all the time because he's not interested in being yelled at, because he's been yelled at and it's not his thing. And so he's not performing, which makes me look bad. Which, when you're in a spiritually repressive environment and your family or your significant other is not performing to the level that you've learned to perform, which they probably shouldn't be because it's all fucking bullshit anyway, but the only thing you can do is become more controlling. So I just probably, I would imagine, I probably was, suffocating in trying to control him to be the good little cult member, the good little church guy, to be the guy that goes along with things and that loves the spirit and that, wants to be one of Duran's spiritual men, and I'm going to be one of the spiritual women. And so it's just this huge performance. None of it's authentic. It's all based on expectations that we haven't made for ourselves. And, I think that I loved him to my understanding, but I think that I was so controlling because I was dumped such a heavy load on who and what I was supposed to be and the expectations that came with that and my relationship with him. So, and he never performed. Looking back, good for him. I don't think he should have. Fuck all of that. It was a bunch of bullshit. But, so we kind of go through getting in a relationship with each other, and I think a lot of the times we just went through the motions. And we were very young. We fought all the time. We were always fighting about something. And it was all about the expectations of the spiritual stuff that I thought that mattered at the time. Because we weren't even having money issues. Because we both worked and money went into the pot and then bills were paid. We didn't have anything extra either. It's not like we were going out. There was money for alcohol and cigarettes. And that was about the kind of money that we spent. We rarely ever went to anything more than that. Like, we didn't date like that. There was parties that were all within the church, and those were the events that everybody would get together at and do. So, So, since I started a lot of this talking about how we build up these walls, right? I talked about how when you've gone through trauma, you create all these ways to protect yourself. When you're no longer in the trauma, you have to take those down, because walls work both ways. Walls prevent people from getting in, but they also prevent you from getting out. They prevent you from really letting people know who you are. They prevent you from connecting with people. They get in the way. And if you were a child like me, then, there was a time and a place that was important. That was the way that you protected yourself. But if you're no longer in that place, it's important to learn that you don't need that, and you have to take that protection down, because the things that you want most in your life lay on the other side of the walls that you created at one time to protect yourself. So to create the kind of connection and love and the things that you probably were drawn to the cult for, those are the things that you need to let go of, so that you now can find people and know that you're healthy enough and strong enough to find the people that you're going to create emotionally beneficial relationships with people that you can love truly, and then that you can be yourself, and that you can be authentic, and you can, be the freak that you are, the weirdo that you are, the wonderful person that you are. And that when people see you, that they love you, and they want to know you, and they want to be friends with you, and they want to have fun with you, and they want to laugh with you, and they want to hear your point of view. And to do that, you have to be willing to let this stuff open up a little bit and start breaking down those walls and set up boundaries. Because you're a fucking adult now, and you are old enough and able enough to set up boundaries with people you know now and new people that you meet. And setting up boundaries creates the protection that you can be yourself. And then if they don't respect that, then they know how they have to behave. So how do we remove these walls? How do we begin to open that part of us back up? And some of the things that I've told you help that. When I've talked to you guys about meditating, when I've talked to you about the breathing stuff, a lot of that stuff does help to do that. Excuse me. The other thing, though, that I used to practice when I was really getting into how to break down my heart walls, and that's literally what I call it. And I actually would imagine like little castle walls surrounding my heart. I imagined that those little walls were preventing anybody bad from getting in, but it was also keeping out the people that I loved. And that was enough for me to decide that I needed to begin to open up so that I could be who I was, and so that I could share myself with people. And some of it is just making the mental connection to saying that you are going to make a 10% effort to be more authentic to yourself. And trust that when you're more authentic, you begin to attract the people who are looking to be your friend, and looking to be in your life, and looking to know you. So start with just imagining literally that you're tearing them down. Like, do a meditation and sit with yourself and just imagine a little wall that you go in, and that piece by piece you're starting to break down. And with that you're going to be 10% more authentic with the people in your life and with new people that you meet. Well, I hope that was great for today. We will dive into Jessica and Landon's divorce. I know we really didn't get into their wedding much, but it's not too important. So, but we're gonna dive into Jessica and Landon's divorce because it happened pretty quick, and we'll go from there next week. Hope you guys have a great one. We are gonna have a guest on. We are gonna have a former member on. So I'm so excited to share that with you guys. You got it. Yeah, the piece about my story, that's actually not going to be for a couple episodes. So the next episode will actually be a former member. So tune in for that. You're not going to want to miss it. So have an amazing one. Love you all. Bye-bye.